Hi, I'm going to just move this down. So my story is about the least hot time you can have while surrounded by the greatest number of genitals. Yeah. Back when I was in school, I got a job working in a chocolate store, which pretty much sounded like the greatest job ever. And my impression after leaving the interview is that my job pretty much had two main components. One, making chocolate, and two, eating chocolate. In reality, unfortunately, my main responsibility was hosting children's birthday parties. And I'd just like to reassure you that none of the aforementioned genitals in this story belong to children. It's not that kind of story. Chocolate-themed children's birthday parties are a terrible idea. And here's how they would pretty much go. So I would get up in front of the kids and I would tell them about how to make chocolate, during which they would get to eat 0 chocolate. And during which they would start to plot my eventual and inevitable downfall. And then they would go and pick out these plastic molds of like unicorns or baseballs or whatever, and they would fill them with chocolate, and then while those were setting, I would bring out all this candy, and they would make these giant sculptures of candy that were glued together with warm milk chocolate, which sounds pretty great, except, my job was to explain to them that while they were making the chocolate, they can't eat the chocolate. Because the minute that they started eating the chocolate, everything would just go to hell. And then they would ignore me and eat all the chocolate, and everything would pretty much go to hell. And in the midst of this sort of sugar-fueled frenzy, I would bring out this cake, and the cake was actually like a chocolate, it was like a hard chocolate shell. It was like hollow, and all the kids would sing, and then I would give the birthday kid a hammer, and the kid... None of this was my idea. And then the kid with the hammer would smash the cake and all the kids would grab the chocolate and I would try to grab the hammer and hope that today was not my day for a catastrophic brain injury. So this was my job. And the whole thing sort of beginning to end was sort of a classic horror movie. There was screaming, there was crying, there was chaos, there was violence, and then there were children singing in unison. So, the whole thing was pretty humiliating, and, there'd be a point where I'd sort of be standing in the middle of this room, near tears, just saying, please behave, please, please behave. So when my boss said that we were going to branch out and start doing adult events, my response was, fucking yes. So the first event we were going to do was, it was called the Love, Sex, and Seduction Show. And I was actually really excited about it. I thought it'd be really fun. There would be no children there. There was a probably less likelihood that I would have to wash chocolate out of my hair. And I thought it would be kind of neat. So, and I should say that I've worked lots of jobs where a little bit of sexiness has gone a long way to make up for a complete lack of adequate compensation. When I was freelancing, I ghost wrote love letters for a little while, which was amazing. And these men would just call me up and tell me all about their relationships. And I would ask questions and they would just tell me all the details of their love lives, which I thought was really funny. So that was a job I did for a little while and that was fun. And then once for an arts festival, I organized for free a food-themed cabaret where we had all the sort of middle of the road conservative audience lining up to get spanked by our host and we had blind taste testings and we had this male burlesque dancer who did this dance with bread dough that just was one of the most unlikely and incredible things I've ever seen. So in the days leading up to the Love, Sex, and Seduction show, I had several indications that this was not going to be that. We'd kind of ramped up production at the store. We were making all these products to sell at the show. And production was run by this little She was sort of very sweet and a little bit shy, sort of middle-aged Filipino woman named Linda. And Linda was not wildly enthusiastic about this show, mostly because the whole store became this kind of factory, production line orgy of erect chocolate penises and of various sizes and colors, and then these small dainty pussies on a stick, and so it was just genitals everywhere, and Linda was not particularly enthusiastic about this, and none of us were particularly enthusiastic about this, and it was also a lot of really hard work, and I'm not the best sleeper at the best of times, but it gets worse when I'm sort of stressed or overtired. And so one day, after 14 hours of just dick after dick after dick, I went home and went to sleep and dreamt of armies of genitals chasing me down the street. It was not a good scene at all. And by the end of the week, we were all just completely exhausted and a little bit shell-shocked. And Linda was just completely resigned to this whole thing. And I swear to God, you could hear her from the basement where she was wrapping the chocolates and putting them in boxes, and she'd be like, "We need more big, dark dicks." We're out of white pussies. And it's just it was just great. Yeah. Anyway, the sheen had sort of worn off the event by the time we arrived at the show, which is good because nothing says love, sex, and seduction like 53,000 square feet of convention space in Mississauga at 8 o'clock in the morning. So, it was, my job basically was to wear a little tiny black dress and very tall high heels and entice men to come over and taste our chocolate fountain. That was my job. And I quickly learned two things. One, $8 an hour is really not a lot of money. And two, my high heels were cutting off circulation to several of my toes. So, this was not the experience I particularly wanted. We were kind of on this corner in the show, and so I could kind of look across at two booths. And on one side, there was the Playboy channel, which had this video loop of naked mini golf, which I just have to say is not really very much of a sport. The women really had the naked part down, not so much the mini golf. And so there was that in one direction, and then on the other side, there was a plastic surgery booth with an endless video loop playing of Botox injections into women's faces, which is pretty much the worst way to advertise Botox injections. So this is what I was faced with. And the rest of the show wasn't really very much sexier. There was the requisite booth giving away free copies of the Toronto Star because those guys are everywhere. And then there were some fairly embarrassed-looking shirtless New York firefighters selling naked calendars of themselves. I know, it was sort of sad. And then there was a booth that I swear to God was called the Spin a Chick Lube booth, where there was a girl in a bikini who was sitting on kind of a giant upside down sort of frisbee looking thing on a platform, and there was lube, and then you could spin her, which is, I guess, a thing you could do if you had a lot of lube. Yeah. So who, you might wonder, would spend their Saturday at a sex convention in Mississauga? Not a lot of people, it turns out. But most of them were like this one couple who came up to the booth, and I remember them very clearly. He had a mullet, and she had cleavage down to approximately her belly button, and they were about my parents' age. And he picked up two of our large erect chocolate cocks and asked her which one she wanted. One was white and one was dark. And then she was like, "Oh no, they're too big." And then he looked at me and said, "Oh, she's never complained about that before," and winked. Yeah. Yes. And, I'm really happy that they have a great sex life and stuff, but I was like, there again, standing and feeling just like this is a little bit humiliating, standing with my arms crossed, not being able to feel my feet and going, please just behave yourselves. So I quit the job fairly shortly thereafter, and it was actually several months before I regained full feeling in all of my toes. I have gotten over my temporary dislike of chocolate, and I no longer have nightmares about genitals chasing me down the street. The one thing, though, I'm never hosting another fucking children's birthday party as long as I live. Thanks.